And this is a message whose time has come. What we have been taught beautifully for many, many years by our master teacher, now researchers are finally coming out to mirror and to validate what Ramtha has told us for years and years about the tunnel and about the life review and about what goes on after the life review. And today's speaker has compiled the most extensive evidence through near-death experience documentation that's compelling and scientifically validates life after life. And that is a message that is hopeful for all of us. He has collected the most amount of documented near-death experiences. He has a website that makes all of this information available. His wife painstakingly had all of that information translated into over 20 languages so that this message could reach to all corners of the world. So he's not the only one doing the research, but he is the preeminent researcher. His book, Evidence of the Afterlife, it's so interesting because it talks about the concepts that you and I have been taught for many, many years. And it furthermore validates it from a scientific point of view so that there is less and less doubt about this phenomenon. Other authors, this is by Jim Tucker. Life Before Life. This is children's memories of previous lives. Remember what Ramtha told us while our children are still young to query them about their last life, and many of them were able to remember aspects of their last life. In fact, my own son thought I was dark-skinned for years, and he would tell my wife, "Now he's the dark one." So in his eye, until he got a little older, I was the dark one in the family. This is a beautiful book by an MD, Ian Stevenson. How many of you remember Ramtha talking about birthmarks are the revelation of a past tragedy? Almost all of you. Again, the scientific evidence by a MD who has been able to prove the existence of birthmarks and how they reveal tragedies from a past life. This is called Where Reincarnation and Biology Intersect. Beautiful name. And for all the people in the world, these books are available, hopefully through RSC only. But I'm not sure. How many of you remember Ramtha's epic teaching on the plane of bliss? When I was in the car with our guest speaker last night, and I was talking to him about some aspects of his book, and I simply said, you know, they have in there tunnel and life review, but they don't go any further into the after-death experience. And I told them that our teacher has told us many things about the plane of bliss, about the contemplation and the halls of knowledge that are available to us. So he gets a copy of that to further his own education. And we're sitting there last night, and he was talking. Jay-Z was in the room, and I realized that he didn't realize that in his midst was the one person who probably has more experience with the tunnel and the afterlife than any other person on the planet. And he just went, oh my God. And so she has a beautiful CD out called My Life on the Other Side, and he'll get a copy of this also. When he came, he said, of course, I'm coming as a teacher. He said, but I'm also coming as a student because I want to learn. He's humble, he's curious, He's committed to making this message available to as many people who have the eyes to see and the ears to hear. He's humbled to be here. He's excited to be here. We're going to have to remind him not to talk so fast so that the translators in the back and those all over the world can righteously deliver this message. Please welcome Dr. Jeffrey Long.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Appreciate that. Thank you. Okay, but thank you all. Wow, what a round of applause. Thank you so much for your interest in coming out here and that rousing round of applause. I've never given a talk where there's that much enthusiasm. I hope you continue to feel that enthusiastic at the end of my talk too as well here. I guess that'll be the real barometer. And thank you so kindly for that introduction. This has really been a fantastic experience already for the several days that I've been here. And certainly, absolutely, a special thanks to J.Z. Knight, many others that have made my visit here incredibly hospitable. Absolutely, I want to thank each and every one of you and each person around the world. And there's over 1,000 listening to this discussion today. Again, a heartfelt thanks to you. I come as a teacher, but I also, as you heard, also am always a student, certainly interested in the questions that you have, your comments, and the insights that each of you have. If we bring up those questions at the end of the talk, that would be fantastic. I absolutely will stay here as long as I need to address any of your questions or comments, and I kind of think that might be the most valuable part of this talk as well. So let's jump right into this. What is a near-death experience? That's what I'll be talking about today. And I have, as a researcher, a fairly simple-minded view of what a near-death experience is. If you're a near-death experience, that means two components. You're near death. In other words, you have a life-threatening event, and you're so physically compromised that if you didn't get better, you would suffer permanent, irreversible death. These people are so physically compromised as a result of an accident, a trauma, an illness. They're so close to death that they're unconscious, or they may be clinically dead. In other words, no spontaneous heartbeat, no spontaneous breathing. These people are truly as close to death as you could possibly imagine. And yet, at the time that they're having a near death, they're unconscious or clinically dead, at a time that if you read the dictionary definition, it shouldn't be possible to have any kind of memory during that time period. They do. And that is the experience part of near-death experience. And we'll get into an example of that shortly. Now, while no two near-death experiences are the same, and I would emphasize that, when you study many near-death experiences, and I've now received over 2,500 near-death experiences in our research database. And when you research that many, I, as other researchers in this field, find a very consistent pattern of elements. And that's what makes near-death experiences so exciting, is that remarkable consistency among experiences and around the world. I knew nothing about near-death experiences over a quarter century ago when I was in my residency training in radiation oncology. I'm a physician, and my medical specialty is radiation oncology, which is the use of radiation to treat cancer. So I was in my residency one day going through one of the most prestigious medical journals in the world, the Journal of the American Medical Association, looking for an article related to cancer. And as I was flipping through those pages, suddenly the title of an article caught my eye, and it had the term near-death experience in it. I'd never heard about that, and I was immediately fascinated. And the doctor in me said, "What is this? You're either dead or you're not, and how can you be near death and unconscious and have an experience? Seems impossible." So I read the article and was immediately fascinated. In that very first article, Here it was, people having experiences like this all around the world with remarkably consistent elements. And I knew as a doctor, as a scientist, that what's real is consistently observed. And I said, this is incredible. This is fascinating. I even stopped and looked up a few other articles in the bibliography, which was pretty thin back then. This was the early 1980s. Near-death experiences were first described in 1975. But I remember thinking prophetically, boy, could I have known, why isn't there more research being done on this fascinating phenomena? Oh, was I ever to find out? Well, I kind of bookmarked that. And it was 2 years later, I was at the University of Iowa, and it's even colder than here, if you can believe that. I was in the wintertime. So there, a college buddy of mine and his wife visited that cold winter day, and there's, not much you could do other than come indoors and have a dinner, so we did that at a restaurant. And during the course of that dinner conversation was a discussion that changed my life. And it's so serendipitous and so simple, and yet it became so powerful. Here's what happened. During dinner conversation, my friend's wife said she had a lot of medical allergies, so severe, in fact, that at one point while she was under general anesthesia, asleep, totally under, her heart stopped due to an allergic reaction from the medicine she was receiving. And she died. We call these near-death experiences, forget it, they should be called death experiences, because like her, like so many others, these people died. So that was what she said. She just basically said, well, my heart stopped. I was under general anesthesia, and I died. But she said it in a real funny way. And the physician in me kind of said, wait a minute, she said that very funny. It's puzzling. There seems to be, and I knew as a doctor, I think there might be more to this story. Time stood still, and about 30 seconds later, I asked what should have been the dumbest question of my life. I'm serious. She was under general anesthesia, sound asleep. Under that blanket of anesthesia, there's nothing. But her heart also stopped. It's impossible to have a conscious experience, right? And yet, I finally got up the courage to risk looking stupid. And I said, well, did anything happen when you were under general anesthesia and your heart stopped? And she said, why, yes. At that moment, I heard the first near-death experience of my life. She said, well, my consciousness separated from my body and went over my body. And from that vantage point, I was able to see my own frantic resuscitation efforts. The electrocardiogram, a measure of heart's electrical activity, was, of course, flat. And I know as a doctor, that machine makes a heck of a racket when the heart stops. So as a result of that, she described that as I had seen as a doctor and knew full well. She described the frantic confusion, the anguish, the fact that the crash cart wasn't there, the kind of confusion that I can tell you as a doctor really happens when somebody codes unexpectedly. And that's exactly what she described. I started having chills at the reality of her description. Oh, but it got better. She then went on to tell me that her consciousness left the operating room from over her body, watching her own resuscitation, left the operating room theater, and went into the nursing station area of her hospital. With her consciousness apart from her body, she saw and heard what the nurses were saying while she was under general anesthesia, coded, and her body in a different part of the hospital. She then went on to describe passing into a tunnel, so common in near-death experiences, passed through the tunnel into an unearthly beautiful realm, colors that are so beautiful that the description doesn't have a correlate on earth, music that was fantastic. She met some relatives that she knew in her life that had died and had a beautiful, joyous conversation with them. And ultimately, at the end of her experience, some loving, beautiful spiritual beings with her asked her if she wanted to return to her body or not. And she wrestled with that decision. She felt at home. She felt overwhelming love and peace, which is so typical of near-death experiences. And she really wasn't sure what she wanted to do. She finally decided to return to her earthly body, and boom, back she was. She woke up 4 days later in the intensive care unit. After she was there a while longer, she went back to the same hospital floor where she saw the nurses during her near-death experience. And she told the nurses what they were saying and what they were doing while she was under general anesthesia and coded and far away. The nurses freaked. If we have any nurses here, you can just imagine, you can imagine what they felt like. This was also before 1975 and before near-death experience was widely known. The nurses did not know what to do, so this was a Catholic hospital, so they called in a nun. This is great. I love this audience already. You know where this is going, and you're right. Yep, okay, this is great. Maybe everyone's psychic and can see into the future here, so you're right. So as you can imagine, the nun did what nuns do, listened very carefully to her astounding experience, and then declared it to be the work of the devil, and left. That, for my friend's wife, that was the first time that one of the first times in her life she had shared the experience, and she didn't know what to make of it, but she said, I kind of don't think it was of the devil. Thank you. And I listened to this and said, I'm flabbergasted. First time in my life I'd heard this and said, I read about this several years ago. I think you had one of these near-death experiences. I'll have to go get you some of the medical literature I had found on that. And I was going, wow. And at that point in time, I committed to myself that I was going to find out more about these experiences, because I knew if these were real, this would change my view of the universe and a lot more of the earth we live in. And so at that point, in the back of my mind, on that cold winter day in Iowa, I decided that someday I needed to learn about these experiences. It was many years later. I'm a little bit of a computer geek, I admit that. I was fairly good at developing websites in the early days of the computers in the 1990s. And so finally, I decided to set up a website devoted to near-death experience. And so I did that. This is nderf.org. You'll hear me refer to it as NDERF. So I want to let you know, if I say NDERF, that means my website, Near-Death Experience Research Foundation. And also, I assume all of you are familiar if I say NDE, that's an abbreviation for near-death experience, just to make sure we're all on the same page on those important terms. Well, I set up the website, and very humble beginning. You know, Yahoo was the major search engine at that time, and I was like number 64 the first time I checked for near-death experience. But miraculously, about 22 people over several months somehow found my website and answered the detailed questionnaire that I had about near-death experience on it. So finally, when I downloaded the first 22 experiences that had ever been shared, I started reading them. I mean, it was almost like a leading skeptic. I wasn't going to read material or take other people's word. I really wanted to go to the original source of information, those that actually had near-death experiences, to decide for myself if they're real, because it was that important to me to know the truth about them. I read the first 22, and it was a wow moment. I said, I get it. These experiences are real. The same pattern of elements other researchers described were there, and I was amazed. And then began my voyage of studying near-death experiences from that very humble beginning. When I published the book, which was actually completed close to 3 years ago, at that point in time we had about 1,600 near-death experiences. After my book was published, people kept sharing more and more of these experiences, and now we're up to over 2,500. And as I've said before, and I think it's worth repeating, as a physician, as a scientist, what is real is consistently observed. And there's no question that the elements and what we're seeing and what we'll talk about today are consistently observed, not only in now over 2,000 near-death experiences that I've studied, but it's also consistently observed by the research of many other people. And if you put that all together, I think you will find, as we talk about this today, overwhelming, compelling evidence for the reality of near-death experiences and their consistent message that there is an afterlife, a wonderful afterlife for all of us. So let's look at that further. Thank you. Not everybody who has that close brush with death has a near-death experience. Multiple studies have found that, in fact, only about 10 to 20% of people that nearly die will have a near-death experience. We absolutely do not know why some people have a near-death experience when they nearly die and some don't. It's one of the great mysteries. Near-death experiences are not rare. A Gallup poll published in 1982 estimated that perhaps 5% of the adult population in the United States had a near-death experience at some time in their life. And I won't ask directly, at least not right now, but I will bet you there are a whole bunch of you in this room that have had a near-death experience, and that probably was a major reason that you're interested in coming to Ramtha School of Enlightenment and listening to these kind of talks. So certainly commend you. Near-death experiences happen to children, and they happen to adults. We have many, many near-death experiences from physicians and scientists. We have near-death experiences from priests, from ministers, from every religion you can think of, and some you probably can't. We even have near-death experiences from people who were atheists at the time of their near-death experience. But I should put an asterisk by atheist, because it is extremely unusual for somebody who is an atheist at the time of their near-death experience to remain an atheist after they've had their experience. Near-death experiences almost uniformly cure atheism. We hope our atheists don't have to all go through a life-threatening event to learn. That's a tough way to learn, isn't it? But there's no doubt that it's very, very unusual for people to remain an atheist after they've had this. Even those who have never heard of near-death experience and cannot fathom that such an experience could happen to them have near-death experiences. Again, bottom line, we cannot predict who will have a near-death experience at the time of a life-threatening event, and we can't predict what the exact specific content of the NDE will be. Startlingly, any of us and all of us could possibly have a near-death experience. It seems to be, if you will, an equal opportunity experience if you're one of the 10 or 20%. Let's talk a little bit about the evidence I have. I certainly had a very strong foundation of science and scholarly research when I started writing my book. There are literally hundreds of scholarly publications about near-death experience in many, many books and publications, including some of the most prestigious medical and scientific journals in the world. So I had a lot of prior foundation of research and understanding to guide me as I started my own in-depth research. What you're going to hear today, ladies and gentlemen, is fantastic, but I want to assure you right off the bat that the major points that I'm making today have been corroborated by prior scholarly research. Generally, nowhere near as big as studies, but other researchers are seeing exactly what you are going to be hearing as part of my study today. Remember, I said what's real is consistently observed. It's being consistently observed among scores of other researchers. And this is what I found, and this is what my colleagues doing research in this field have found. And we'll get into that very shortly. Oh yes, the book. We heard about that in the introductory comments. That was published in January 2010. Boy, did my life change. First book, unknown author. I thought we'd just publish it and go on living. Wrong. I hate to use the term dead wrong, but it kind of was. But it was, I thought it was important for me to share it with the world. The website, the NDERF, the website, for over a decade, it was just a service. We answered email, we shared the experiences. Everybody that gave us permission to publish their near-death experience, I did. That's how we were sharing with the world. We thought lovingly and appropriately. I was just focused on service. I didn't think this was going to happen. 8 days after the book was published, it became a New York Times bestseller. So, I really didn't realize how big a deal that was, or if it's a big deal. I found out quickly that's a big deal. I was on the NBC Today show. That was wild, but not as wild as being on the O'Reilly Factor, where I got to hear or I got to discuss with O'Reilly about the analogy of near-death experiences and what about Hitler. So that was exciting. Actually, O'Reilly loved my book. He ended up having it on his website, and the book went back into the extended New York Times bestseller list after that show. He really was happy with it, but he's tough. He's really tough. Fox News. Interestingly, what you're hearing here today is now increasingly accepted by mainstream science. I remarkably was asked to present this material at the New York Academy of Sciences. Oh, it was beautiful. Thank you. So from 44 stories high, looking out over Manhattan, there I was talking to these learned and prestigious people. It was a fantastic experience. It was funny, as a little bit of an aside, while I was talking to these people that lived in Manhattan with this work, I told them, well, I'm from a small town, Houma, Louisiana. It's, believe it or not, southwest of New Orleans. You talk about deep south. And I said, well, gee, this is interesting being in Manhattan. The tallest building in Houma is 10 stories high. And they freaked. The people who lived in Manhattan thought that was a little bit incredible. But much to my abject delight and relief, frankly, there was incredible local interest. In this small, profoundly conservative, both politically and religious area that I practice in, they loved my book. I talked to about every single community group, and they were fascinated, which was amazing to me. So that was a very, very positive experience. And of course, from all around the world, the feedback has been absolutely phenomenally positive. So certainly helping encourage me to write my next book, which we'll get into. Okay, that's interesting. I guess we should hang on this. This is nature's way of saying we should hang on that slide. Nope, there we go. Okay. Well, with this build-up now for so long, let's start talking about what I have in my book, the evidence of the afterlife. The main database that I have, while we have huge numbers of near-death experiences, I picked 617 for the book that were shared on the same version of the near-death experience questionnaire that I had on the website, so that we could be comparing apples with apples in the responses. This is also the latest version of my questionnaire, and we become very, very astute at making sure that we had near-death experiences in the database and non-near-death experiences not in the database. So 617 sequentially shared near-death experiences, which is by far the largest study, even with this number, of near-death experiences that had ever been reported in the history of the world. And from this evidence and from other near-death experiences shared, we found 9 lines of evidence. All of these lines of evidence consistently pointing to the fact that, hey, world, near-death experience is, in a word, real. And moreover, the consistent message of what you see in near-death experience, that afterlife, the fact that we're far more than our physical bodies, is overwhelmingly consistently seen. Let's see what I'm talking about here as we go through each of those 9 lines of evidence. Evidence number 1. In the book, I call them proofs, and I don't think the term proof is overstated. But the very first one is, people have crystal clear consciousness during a near-death experience. It's not dreamlike or illusory to the person experiencing it in any way. To understand how incredible that is, to have a lucid organized experience while unconscious or clinically dead, let me share with you what happens medically when you have what's called a cardiac arrest, severe heart attack, if you will, when your heart stops beating. The moment your heart stops beating, of course, blood stops flowing up to your brain. But 10 to 20 seconds after you stop having blood flow to your brain, the electroencephalogram, which is a measure of brain electrical activity, goes absolutely flat. There is no measurable brain electrical activity at that point in time. You're not only unconscious, you're deeply comatose, and it is physiologically impossible to have any kind of a memory from that period in time. There's no measurable brain function at all. And yet, this is the time, and we have now hundreds of these accounts, that after cardiac arrest, after the heart is stopped, just like in the example I shared at the beginning, consciousness is above the body. We often call it the out-of-body experience, often watching their own frantic resuscitation efforts. That is impossible for that memory, for that observation, to be due to physical brain functioning. It is a physical impossibility, and yet that's what near-death experiencers describe. And in fact, in a survey question, I ask, what was your level of consciousness and alertness during the NDE? Nearly 3/4 said that they were having more consciousness and alertness during their experience than earthly everyday life. Another nearly 20% said it was at least normal. And look at this, how few people, less than 6%, said during their NDE they were having less consciousness and alertness than their earthly everyday life. That's fantastic, medically speaking, given that they're unconscious or clinically dead. The very fact that they have these memories, they have these detailed experiences, is incredible. And I might add, near-death experiences are remembered literally verbatim years to decades later. We've had several major studies find that near-death experiences are a special type of consciousness. They're remembered in detail, even years, even decades after the experience. The experience is neither forgotten, nor does it seem to be embellished with details added. So if you hear anybody share a near-death experience, even if they had it decades prior to the time they share it with you, please be assured what you are hearing that person share is exactly what happened. Now, we've talked several times about the fact that early in near-death experiences, they have what's called an out-of-body experience. Consciousness typically goes above the body. If they're in a room, it's often at ceiling level or in the corner of a room. And that happens in 45% of the near-death experiences in my study. The scientist in me asks a very simple question. Okay, here's their consciousness over the body. Is what they are seeing real? Very straightforward question. There's been a good, actually 2 prospective studies of near-death experience. Both of these Sabom and Sartori study involved people that had that cardiac arrest. Their heart stopped. They had to be defibrillated to be brought back to life. And yet, in the group of near-death experiencers that both of these researchers studied, they studied 2 groups. One were people that had their heart stopped, cardiac arrest, and had a near-death experience. The other control group were people that had that cardiac arrest but did not have a near-death experience. The group that had a near-death experience was asked to tell what their own resuscitation was like. Same thing with the control group. The group that had a near-death experience and had the out-of-body experience and was able to see their own resuscitation was astoundingly accurate, down to the finest details. Where were the paddles placed? How often did they have to get shocked before they came back to life? Who came in the room? Who left? I almost shouldn't say this, but what doctors were cussing and unprofessional, and which ones weren't. So, I mean, detail, just incredible. And it's not surprising because they really were there. They really saw what was going on. The control group in both of these studies was wildly inaccurate. They'd either say it's impossible for me to guess what happened, or the control group would say what they saw on TV. And folks, let me assure you, as a doctor, resuscitations that you see on TV aren't necessarily the way it happens in the real world. Believe me. It can be frantic, there can be unprofessional behavior. Gosh, I hate to admit this, it's usually the doctors, I know. Things don't go well, there can be a lot of tears. It's very emotionally trying when someone dies, and we're struggling as doctors to bring them back to life. And that's the kind of thing you don't see on TV, but that's what really happens. I know, I've been there for resuscitations. I studied 287 people that had these out-of-body observations of ongoing earthly events while they were unconscious or clinically dead. My research question was real clear. Was there any reason for either me as a doctor or for the person who shared the experience to believe there was anything unrealistic about what they saw? And if there was even one thing described in the account that was unrealistic, that would go into the unrealistic category, even if 99% of what they shared appeared to be entirely real. So of my study group, 97.6, about 98% of these out-of-body observations were real without any inaccuracy whatsoever, which is exactly what you would predict if they really had consciousness over their body, watching ongoing earthly events while unconscious or clinically dead. Exactly what I saw. And in fact, sometimes these, like in the example I gave at the very beginning, these out-of-body observations are actually far from the physical body and far from any possible physical sensory awareness. As in the example I gave, it can be in a different part of the hospital. We had one person describe while they were coded in the emergency room what was going on with their family in the hospital cafeteria, or even far from the hospital. And yet, even when these observations are far from any possible physical sensory awareness, this overwhelming accuracy of their observations, even when they go back and check it later, is absolutely accurate. We've had details described on the tops of buildings when they're in the out-of-body experience that they could not have known unless they were actually there. That's how realistic, that's how accurate people are having these out-of-body experiences, typically a common first element that occurs in near-death experiences. Uh-oh, what's this? Okay, here's how to study near-death experiences. We'll put a big sign up. All right, maybe we won't study near-death experiences that way. It says, if you are reading this, you are dead. Now, don't worry, I'm glad you're all sitting down. No one here is dead. But there are some wags that suggest maybe we should do this. All right, let's move on quickly, very quickly. Sheesh, how did that one get in there? One of the things that I find most compelling for evidence for the reality of near-death experiences is that they can occur in the blind. Well, let's talk about the blind. Medically speaking, you can be partly blind, or you can be totally blind. There is a difference. You can also be blind from birth, or you can develop blindness later in your life. The strictest test to study near-death experiences and the ability to see in near-death experiences in the blind would be those born totally blind at birth. For those born totally blind at birth, vision, anything about vision, is unknown and unknowable. Put yourself in my shoes as a researcher trying to explain vision to somebody born totally blind in terms of the remaining four senses: hearing, taste, touch, smell. Yeah, I tried. It doesn't work. So for these people, it's unknown and unknowable, and yet near-death experiences in those born totally blind have been described that were typical near-death experiences with very, very detailed vision. I interviewed Vicky. Vicki, in her early 20s, had a severe car accident. She had been born totally blind, and she was being driven home, and the person who was driving crashed. She was immediately unconscious. The first time Vicki ever saw her body, or even saw anything, was when she was in the emergency room. Boom, all of a sudden, she had an out-of-body experience and saw her body on the gurney below. She was immediately, you can just imagine what you would feel if you had vision for the first time. Here's what really happened. She was horrified because the vision was so unfamiliar. She didn't know that that was even possible. And yet, after she calmed down, she correlated by her prior touch of her hair, and interestingly, by touching a ring her father gave her, with her sense of vision from above, she suddenly realized, that's me. Vicki went on to have a very detailed near-death experience. She described what many near-death experiencers are, what's called 360-degree vision. You see simultaneously and with complete awareness, front, back, right, left, top, bottom. It's truly 360 degrees is a two-dimensional term. This is actually spherical vision. And we have many near-death experiencers that describe this. In fact, I spent quite a bit of time with Vicki trying to describe pie-shaped visual fields. And I think she thought I was kidding because, again, her whole life's experience was spherical vision. Isn't that interesting? But no question about that. And I can assure you, as you all obviously know, having that kind of highly detailed visual experience, and Vicki, she also went through a tunnel. She also encountered deceased relatives, loving reunion, very, very beautiful, detailed visual experience. Absolutely medically impossible for somebody born totally blind to have that type of visual experience. And it would be impossible for somebody who is awake and alert, who is totally blind, to have vision like that. But throw in the fact that she was unconscious. Yeah, near-death experiences are for real. Powerful evidence right there for the reality of near-death experiences. Oh, let's give an example here. Shortly after the book was published, I received Marta G's near-death experience. This is from her own words. By the way, parents, if you have a blind child, please don't let them go out in a lake. Not a good idea, but Marta got away at the age of 5, even though she was blind, and went out into a lake, a little pond, and she drowned. And here's what happened in Marta G's own words. For the age of 5, a beautiful woman dressed in bright white light pulled me out and, looking into my eyes, asked me what I wanted. I was completely satisfied and could think of nothing until it occurred to me to take a trip around the lake. I did, and saw detail I would never have seen in real life. I could go anywhere, even to the tops of trees, by simply intending to do so. I was legally blind, and for the first time saw leaves on trees, birds' feathers, birds' eyes, details on telephone poles, and in people's backyards. That was far more acute than 20/20 vision. We have a small series of near-death experiences in those who are legally blind or severely visually impaired. This isn't a rare anecdote. Every account that we have of people severely visually impaired is picture-perfect vision during their near-death experience. And that is absolutely medically inexplicable. Powerful evidence that these experiences are real. Now, we've only gone through 3 of the 9 lines of evidence, and I will bet you there's a whole bunch of you saying, okay, I'm convinced. And I understand that because these are very, very strong lines of evidence. But wherever you have remarkable spiritual experiences, you will have skeptics, right? Right. And so it is with near-death experience research. I can't talk about all the skeptic arguments against near-death experience because there's too darn many. There's probably over 30. There's definitely over 20 so-called explanations of near-death experience. The reason that there are so many skeptical explanations is very simple. Even the skeptics themselves that so desperately want to say that there's some brain cause for near-death experiences can't. No skeptics will agree on any one or several explanations of near-death experience, even among themselves, the skeptics. And the reason for that is very simple. There's no element of near-death experience that can be explained by any physiological, psychological, or cultural explanation. It's absolutely impossible. So every year or two, skeptics come up with a new explanation and obviously poo-poo all their prior skeptics' explanations, and that's almost a little bit funny when you think about it. And they keep going. Okay, remember in the example I gave at the beginning, my friend's wife was under general anesthesia when she coded. That got my attention as a doctor, and so I said, why don't we study near-death experiences that occur under general anesthesia and see if perhaps we can learn something about the nature of near-death experience. This is a series of 23 near-death experiences that I, with some fairly strict criteria as a researcher, wanted to be sure that they were under general anesthesia when their heart stopped, when they coded, and had a near-death experience. Well, good gosh, I compared, certainly, there's no question about that, and other researchers have found this too, even under general anesthesia, when it should be impossible to know anything, near-death experiences occur, and they are typical near-death experiences. In my research, I had 33 questions in my survey that asked about elements, components, things that occur during near-death experiences. And of those 33 elements, 32 of the 33 elements occurred equally often in the near-death experience under general anesthesia as occurred in near-death experiences that occurred during all other circumstances. No question about that. Even under that blanket of sleep of general anesthesia, the near-death experiences happen and they're identical. Now, interestingly, the only difference is that anesthesia near-death experiences had statistically more tunnel experiences reported. I don't know why that is, but it was the one statistical difference. The other thing that's very important in the question that I had in the survey, remember that question? What was your level of consciousness and alertness during your near-death experience? If anesthesia could modify consciousness during near-death experiences at all, you would expect that in response to that question, people that had their NDE under general anesthesia should say, well, I had less consciousness and alertness than normal, or at least less consciousness and alertness than NDEs that occurred under all other circumstances that weren't under anesthesia. But the responses between the two groups, identical. Same level of consciousness and alertness, whether you had general anesthesia or you did not at the time of your near-death experience. You could just point to that right there and say, done. That single-handedly, once again, proves that near-death experiences are not a product of the physical brain. But wait, we're only up to 4. Remember, there's 9, so let's move on. Uh-oh, here we go. Now what? Oh, yes. For those that can't read it, at the bottom it says 10 to 1 that when he comes to, he tells one of those stories about seeing a bright light at the end of the tunnel. We have here's a light, the light broke off in the operating room and came crashing down. That's lovely. Skeptics will grasp at any straw. Attention, skeptics of the world. This is the 21st explanation of near-death experience. and is equally dumb as all the 20 others. And for those of you that are a little bit nervous, I've been in the operating room a lot medically, and I have yet to see a light crash down on a patient. If that ever happens, I'm sure it would be national news. And so we don't have to worry about that. Well, that's interesting. Let's see what else we got going. Here's a fun one. Perfect playback. I sort of mentioned briefly about the fact that some near-death experiences have what's called a life review. Again, and sometimes I have to pinch myself reading these experiences and say, yeah, they're unconscious or clinically dead, and yet during that time, they can see parts or even all of their prior life in what's called a life review. What happens during a life review is that, and this is incredible, even though they are unconscious or clinically dead for just minutes, they may see literally all of the prior life in which they lived. And you can just imagine the fantastic acceleration of consciousness that would be necessary in a near-death experience for that to happen. It helps give you the flavor of how remarkable these experiences are. And yet, occasionally, with these life reviews, we have what's called a panoramic life review. During a panoramic life review, they not only become aware of their prior life, but in addition to that, watching, they often describe it as like looking at a screen, looking at it somewhere else. It's sort of how they see this. They see the representation of how they live their life. But during a panoramic life review, they not only see their prior life, but they see and literally feel from the perspective of people that they interacted with what that person felt like interacting with them throughout their prior life, which is incredible. You can see immediately how this could be incredibly life-changing. And people are often surprised at what other people felt like that they were interacting with. Absolutely, you could point to this as being just this line of evidence alone about that universal consciousness and connected and unity that we all share. There's no other explanation for them to have a near-death experience, even while clinically dead, and yet know what other people felt like, what they were thinking about, how they impacted other people throughout their life. Absolutely amazing. They're not real common. Only about 14% of near-death experiences I studied had a life review. But from a scientist, I said, oh, this is easy. Let's look for anything that they encountered in their life review that was unreal or hallucinatory. And if we find nothing in their life review that was unreal or hallucinatory, then I think we can all rationally accept that that life review is absolutely a real life review. They really become aware incredibly of what happened in their prior life. Well, again, for either me or for the near-death experiencers, we reviewed all of the life reviews and looked carefully for that. Results, ladies and gentlemen, perfect playback. Everything that they saw and heard during their life review, none of it seemed to be unrealistic. None of it apparently did not happen. No question about that. Very strong evidence that near-death experiences are real. And in fact, they may have encountered a memory or an awareness of a prior life event from early childhood. Near-death experiencers would ask their parents after their NDE if this really happened. And uniformly, if they sought to verify forgotten memories, they found it really happened. And that is absolutely fantastic. No doubt about that. Even while unconscious or dead, people are having this fantastic accelerated consciousness and learning. And it's one of the most transformative parts of the near-death experience. As you can imagine, to see your prior life, to be able to think about it, to understand, and even understand how other people felt that interacted with you. Oh yes. Let me explain the last line on that slide. As I've mentioned, I live in Houma, Louisiana, a small, markedly conservative, both politically and religiously, town at the very far south of Louisiana. I started giving this talk to the community in good faith and just talked about the life review, but immediately when I started talking to community groups in Houma, I was looking at the audience and I saw a funny thing happen. I saw some knees kind of a-shaking, and I saw some people looking right and left, and I saw some people that looked nervous, real nervous. And even after, it was even the first talk I gave, finally someone came up from that deep south and kind of pulled me over and said, Dr. Long, about that life review thing, I've done some things I'm not proud of. What if I have a horrible life review? And again, and so I immediately said, oh, right, okay, so better do that. Fear not the life review. Almost uniformly, when near-death experiencers are seeing all of their prior life events, they are essentially never judged externally by other beings around them. If there's any judgment to do, if there is any decision to be made about what they saw in their prior life, it is the near-death experiencer alone to decide what they think about and how they're going to respond to that living the rest of their lives. So I would share that with my colleagues and community in Houma. You're not going to be externally judged with your life review in a near-death experience. You cannot imagine how reassuring that was to the people in Houma. And then people were able to watch this show with other community groups without knee-knocking and white faces and a strong sense of fear. But it is, life review, a fantastic element of near-death experience. Further strong evidence of its reality. We've talked several times about meeting people that they knew in their earthly life that died, and then their encounter during their near-death experience. These are not like ghostly encounters. These are joyous reunions with people that they knew and loved in their life. And so this is what we call family reunion. Again, not a very common part of near-death experiences percentage-wise, but when you have as many as I do, you end up with 84 near-death experiences. My research question was very simple. In all other altered forms of consciousness that we as human beings have, dreams, hallucinations, everything, in all other altered consciousness episodes, if you encounter other beings, and they commonly do, it's going to be the bank teller you did business with, it's going to be the family member that you said hi to as you came home shortly before you coded or whatever. It's going to be, and all of you that have had dreams or other experiences, you know that it's going to be people that were alive. And that's what is so fascinating and unique about near-death experiences, is that they're virtually all deceased at the time of the near-death experience. That was my research question. Only 4% of near-death experiences that had encounters with other people were people that were definitely alive at the time of the near-death experience. 96% of the time, the near-death experiences only had deceased people, typically family members. About 70-80% of the time, it's family members. But you can certainly encounter deceased spouses, you can certainly encounter neighbors, acquaintances, but no doubt about that, the near-death experience, obviously a unique type of experience where these people may be clinically dead and encounter others who passed prior to their experience. Oh, interestingly, we have many, many near-death experiences where the persons that they encountered seemed familiar in some way, but they could not recognize who they were. We have many experiences where it was only after they recovered from what nearly killed them, and later in life, they're going through old family picture albums, and then boom, there's great-great-grandma, great-great-uncle, and all of a sudden they say, that's who I saw. I didn't recognize them. We even have a small series of near-death experiences, children near-death experiences, where they encounter someone they immediately recognize as a brother or a sister who died and their parents never told them that they had a brother or a sister that died. The reason is parents are so grief-stricken that they will often want to wait until that child is older and can better understand that they had a sibling who died. And yet there they are, a joyous reunion in near-death experiences. And we have, like I said, a small series. Oh, pets are included too. Deceased pets, you name it. I've run it, dogs, cats, horses, birds. Pets of all type that have died occur in near-death experiences. And pets, like people, even if the pet or the person died of a chronic, debilitating, disfiguring illness, essentially always in near-death experiences, the deceased one is picture-perfect health. Amazingly, if they died at a very advanced age, they may look years or even decades younger. If the person encountered is a child who died very early in childhood or as an infant, they may appear some years older in the near-death experience, which is really remarkable when you think about it. But that's what we have, certainly a preponderance of relatives. The only other major study of this found exactly what I found, that near-death experiences only about 4% of the time, if you have somebody that lived previously on Earth, that they were actually alive. So again, further strong evidence for the reality of near-death experiences. You know, one of the things I love about near-death experience research are the near-death experiences from children. We heard from Marta G. earlier, who was 5 years old when she drowned and had a near-death experiences. And the stories the children tell are fantastic. And in fact, do we have any young adults or children under the age of 18 here today? Raise your hand if you're one of our esteemed young adults or children. We have, I think there's some, oh, here we go. All right, we have some children here. Well, hello, appreciate your interest. Look at that, does everyone see the hands over there? We've got some, delighted to have children here coming to hear all about this. Kind of spooky, isn't it, that children can have, and yet it's wonderful in a way for even children that have these experiences can be positively and profoundly changed, and can certainly share that and help us older people and adults understand these remarkable experiences. As a researcher, I was aware that some skeptics said, oh, near-death experiences are culturally determined. In other words, that which you expect to occur during this type of experience will happen. There's nothing unexplained about near-death experience. Well, my response was to study near-death experiences in very young children, age 5 and under. To these very young, and actually the median and average age of my study group was 3.5 years old. To children this young, death is unknown and unknowable. They simply haven't lived enough to really understand death. They almost certainly have never heard of a near-death experience when they're that young. And even if they have heard of a near-death experience, they wouldn't know what it means. It's the perfect group to see if there's any reason to believe that near-death experiences are culturally determined or what you'd expect them to be. Okay, I had 26 near-death experiences in children age 5 and younger. And I compared those same 33 elements of the near-death experience I talked about earlier, of the actual content of the NDE, to everybody else, older children and adults. Absolutely identical. All 33 elements came out exactly the same, no statistical difference between the two groups. Beyond any shadow of a doubt, near-death experiences in very young children do, and they are absolutely identical in content to near-death experiences of older children and adults. The largest corroboration of that was a Dr. Sutherland, who reviewed all the prior published literature on near-death experiences in children and found exactly what I found. Age does not in any way seem to affect the content of near-death experiences. If beliefs about death had any impact on the content of a near-death experience, you would not see this. So again, further strong evidence the near-death experiences are real. Ah, yes. You may have heard in the introductory comments that portions of the NDERF or NDERF website have been translated into over 20 non-English languages. If you go to the website, you can find literally hundreds of near-death experiences that have been translated into all these languages. We have actually used literally hundreds of volunteer translators throughout our time. And by the way, I certainly want to acknowledge my Jody Long, wife, who has taken this project on and helped make sure that we can translate near-death experiences and share them with the world. But we actually have our near-death experience questionnaire translated into over 20 different languages. So as a result, we were able to do by far the largest cross-cultural study of near-death experience ever done. So thank you. And I was astounded when I did this. There's no question, in my opinion, that the content of near-death experiences is identical worldwide. The only thing that happens is that language gets in the way. I mean, listen to the words you use to talk about these experiences. Unearthly, mystical, all these kinds of concepts that occur. I mean, near-death experiences are so unworldly, they're hard enough for people to describe it in their own language. But good gosh, to try to translate it, very, very difficult. But we had several hundred near-death experiences shared in non-English languages, and the content is identical. Now, as a researcher, of course, I said, let's have the sternest test for near-death experiences. Let's find out if there's any cultural influence on near-death experiences at all. So I looked at non-Western near-death experiences, and we'd acquired 3 dozen shared from non-Western countries all around the world. And once again, as I saw in near-death experiences from everywhere else, the content, the near-death experience itself, strikingly similar to the typical Western near-death experiences. Again, fantastic. Again, strong, strong evidence that there's no cultural input in near-death experiences whatsoever. And in fact, it's absolutely amazing for me to think that no matter whether you're a Muslim in Egypt or a Hindu in India, a Christian in the United States, no matter where you are, what your religious background or belief is, you still have the same experience. Remember we said near-death experiences were equal opportunity experiences? There you go. It doesn't get much better than that. And certainly the implications are enormous. This is incredible that no matter where on earth you live, that you can have these types of experiences that other people everywhere else on earth have. The implications to share these experiences from around the world as a common foundation for global understanding and for sharing and awareness. The awareness that wherever we live on earth, we can have the same spiritual experience has huge implications for global understanding and for world peace. We're working on it. Thank you. The impact of personally experiencing one of these profound events, the impact of having a near-death experience is tremendous. There is no question that lives are changed after that. Now, while these experiences are incredible, it takes usually a long time for people to really integrate all their newfound understanding and the remarkable experience and change their life into response to what they now know. It actually takes an average of 7 years after a near-death experience to fully integrate it because the changes are often so dramatic. Both prospective and retrospective studies are finding, and my own study, are all finding exactly the same thing. Overwhelmingly common in near-death experiences is an increased belief in an afterlife. Well, of course. I mean, I don't want to say duh, but because I don't know how that would translate around the world, but I mean, good gosh, they saw an afterlife. They lived that. They faced death. They died, and they saw what's on the other side, and they know that it's wonderful. And of course, they have a reduced fear of death. They died. They know what happened after they died. They know it is a wonderful experience. I mean, they often describe it's coming home. They realize earth isn't their real home. It's these unearthly, heavenly, beautiful realms. That's their real home. In fact, people that have near-death experiences, when they're in these unearthly realms, they feel that great majority of them intensely positive, loving, peaceful feelings. They become aware that these unearthly realms is where they came from and where they are going after they die. And when they're given a choice to return to their earthly body, the great majority of near-death experiencers want to stay in that unearthly, and it's been called a heavenly realm. It's a reasonable way to describe it. And isn't that amazing? These are near-death experiencers who have friends, family, loved ones, and yet their strong sense of being home, of being where they want to be, is so profound that even though prior to the near-death experience, their entire earthly life that they knew, they don't want to go back. They want to stay in that beautiful, unearthly realm. That's how intense. It gives you a little bit of the flavor of just how intensely positive these near-death experiences are. Yeah, near-death experiencers value loving relationships. They will often leave a destructive, unloving relationship and seek out a loving relationship to live the rest of their life. They become much less materialistic. And certainly they have a greatly increased belief in God and many, many more powerful after effects of near-death experience. You really, if you will, know near-death experiences by the effects that it produces in people's lives. You would think that to live their life courageously, knowing that there's an afterlife, a wonderful afterlife for them, for everybody, that death isn't the end, you can just see how important that is for the person having the near-death experience, how they're much empowered to live their life more courageously, more openly, more lovingly than was ever possible before. And the changes people have are absolutely fantastic. So this will be conclusions from part one. Many converging lines of evidence all point to the reality of the near-death experience. And it's not just one or several lines of evidence. There's multiple lines of evidence, all consistently pointing to the fact that near-death experiences are, in a word, real, along with their consistent message of an afterlife. Alternative explanations or skeptical explanations of near-death experience fail and fail miserable. Obviously, this has huge implications for science, for religion, and for all of us that wrestle with these big questions. Certainly, I encourage further scholarly study. Collaboration among academic disciplines, important. I think in the future, we're going to sort of have some differing research focuses. I think there's going to continue to be and should be scholarly research aimed at looking at near-death experiences to increasingly mount that evidence about their reality. And that's perfectly okay, doing the kind of study I just presented. But I think we now have enough evidence, enough confidence that near-death experiences are real, that we can start reasonably going down a different line of research. And that different line of research, which is brand new, is what does it mean about near-death experiences being real? What are the implications for us, for the world? That kind of research is taking a deeper look at near-death experiences. And, folks, that's exactly what I'm doing. There will be, thank you. The first book was exciting, but this second book is going to blow it away. We're going to look deeper into near-death experiences than was ever possible before, now that we have over 2,500. We're going to start looking at the depth of near-death experiences, looking at the big questions that face every single one of us in this room, in this world, and that ever lived in this world. The big questions such as, is there an afterlife? Is there a God? Is there meaning and purpose of the life that we're living here on earth? What is really important for us to be thinking about living our life here? Why is life so dang difficult? And believe me, this research is already quite interesting. This is a work in progress, so these aren't final conclusions. But believe me, I have spent a huge amount of time, and this is what I'm finding. And I think you're going to find this, as I did, very interesting. As with my prior research, I need to do the best scientific methods possible. The research from my prior book has withstood the test of several years. Some stern skeptics and atheists gave it their best shot to argue with my book and went down badly. So it has stood the test of time. So what you're seeing. To do this research in the proper way, I have to investigate both the consistency and the inconsistency of near-death experiences. For example, I ask questions like, during your experience, did you encounter any specific information or awareness suggesting there either is or is not continued existence after earthly life? Only if we get large numbers of experiences that talk uniformly that there is life after death, and we don't get anything where they encountered information in the NDE that there is not life after death, then you can be more confident than ever that, yes, the evidence overwhelmingly points to life after death in near-death experiences by asking it in, if you will, this binary fashion. We're continuing to do research over 1,500 NDEs. We've studied, if you will, the spiritual content, and it has been quite an adventure. This is interesting. Am I going to do something radical? Yep, you bet. We have actually over about 1,000 near-death experiences where a volunteer went through and found this kind of comments in the near-death experience that address the big questions. God, afterlife, meaning and purpose. Why difficulty? What about prayer? What about religion? There's lots of information in near-death experiences that address that. And this volunteer, incredibly, was able to go through that many near-death experiences and put it in a database. Within a few weeks, we will be launching a new service on our NDERF website. It's a searchable database for anybody with specific questions about this type of content in NDEs to search and find that information easily. And they can so this will revolutionize understanding these experiences. For example, if you have concepts of prayer that occur in only 1 out of 50 near-death experiences or 1 out of 80, it's going to be hard to read near-death experiences and assimilate that information. But if you have all the comments about NDE pertinent to prayer all in a row because you searched for that, then you're going to know. And you can determine, anyone on earth can look at that and decide for themselves if what they're reading is consistent, if what they're reading is real and makes sense, and they can do that anytime and any place. This is something that some people that have heard about this have said, this may do for studying and understanding spiritual experiences what the invention of the printing press did for reading. And I'm hoping that's true. Truly a radical, a big deal. I've got my kids calling me a radical now. Because I told them this. I said, isn't that radical? So anyway, yeah, you can tell how much I look like a radical. But anyway. And kids love it. Yeah, there's no doubt that this type of future direction, which I'm working on for the next book, is profoundly important. If substantial consistency is found in the spiritual content of NDEs, I would submit to you, I don't care if the skeptics are correct, and you can nail down each chemical, synapse, neurologic event that led to this. If you've got consistent things that are consistent spiritual information that people are getting while unconscious or clinically dead, that in and of itself is valuable and worth very careful consideration and study. So thank you. So for my next book, Bye Bye Skeptics. Well, this is called an end run. and I think that is even the hardened skeptics will agree that if you have that much consistency from this many experiences, there's something going on. Oh, but actually what it's really going to show is, I think, further powerful evidence for the reality of NDEs. Vitally important for individuals, community, religion, etc. So that's really interesting. Yeah, this is interesting. This is a little bit of an aside. True, I got to put the problem of evil. My son, who's he's worse computer geek than I am, but he was over on the phone one day knowing I was doing this research and goes, Dr. Long, he didn't say that. He said, Dad. But he says, I saw a debate on the internet, and it was this guy named Hitchin, now deceased, but he was administering what is called the hitch slap to the person he was debating by arguing if you had an all-loving and an all-knowing God who was really focused on what's good for us, then why is there evil in the world? Is God either then not all-powerful, or is God not all-loving, or both? And that was the atheist argument, which unfortunately was rather devastating. So my son brought that up as the best he could do. I said, overwhelmingly, the evidence I have in my near-death experiences is that we lived our life before our earthly life. We were in those heavenly realms. We were part of us. That is who we really are. And I said, we have overwhelming evidence in my near-death experience research that in our pre-mortal, our pre-earthly lives, we chose where we would incarnate in our earthly life, the circumstances, and in that decision process, every one of us here, knew full well that there would be difficulties and even evil on earth. And yet the lessons that we all needed, wanted so much to learn were so important to us that we chose to come into a world where there would be evil and where there would be difficulties. So, and the number of experiences of NDEs that address that very topic is vast. This is no small number. My son heard that, and there was this very awkward pause, and he said, Dad, why don't you not put that in your book, but wait until you have a national debate with an atheist, and then jump and blow them away. And I said, Philip, my job is, while that would be entertaining and it would be devastating to their arguments, everything I know that's important, I want to share with the world. We'll let everybody know in the next book all about that. And I think you can start to get the flavor about where this new research is going and how incredibly important that's going to be. By the way, that really is one of the leading atheist arguments. And you can see the impact of this book on the atheism belief, and it's going to take care of it. Interestingly, said I was a computer geek. I also like physics, and as part of that, I can't help but see parallels in physics to what I'm seeing in near-death experiences. And it's really fascinating. Quantum events seem to have some parallels, and certainly a partial explanation for NDEs. And here's something that's literally just a few weeks old that I came up with. One thing that is overwhelmingly common in near-death experiences, one of the things that's almost uniformly described is that during an NDE, time is meaningless. There is no time. And that you remember that life review? How you see all of your prior life, even though you're unconscious or dead for minutes in earthly life? Clearly, time is radically different. In near-death experiences, communication is essentially always non-physical. It seems to be like a super telepathy, sharing of ideas at seeming overwhelmingly rapid speed, instant. There seems to be, the near-death experience realm is non-physical. We are not burdened by the physical bodies. It's not a separate three-dimensional realm. It's non-physical, and time seems to be non-existent. Now that got me to thinking one day, and again just a few weeks ago, and I said, wait a minute, if you start with E equals mc squared, the famous Einstein equation, well, c is the speed of light, and the units of any velocity is distance divided by time. So I said, I got it. Let me solve that well-known equation and well-accepted equation for time. And I won't go through that, but here's what you got. Time is equal to distance divided by the square root of energy, and E is energy, and M is mass. And just to summarize what this means, in any realm of existence, starting with this equation, and this is very simple derivation, nothing fancy. Bottom line, any realm of existence, as energy approaches infinite, or as mass, which is sort of our physical self, our being, that bodies, if you will, mass, anything that has weight, as mass approaches zero in either of these two events, then time approaches zero. It doesn't exist. Time is relative, which is exactly what we observe in near-death experiences and in other human spiritual experiences. Fantastic, the convergence of science. I've Googled this, and if anyone else has written about this, I'm not aware of it. So this is very exciting to see physics converging with observations in NDE. I'd say when I'm looking at the spiritual content of near-death experiences, there seems to be a core message, that which I see more commonly than any other spiritual message in NDEs. And I'm talking about, at this point, having many, many hundreds of near-death experiences overwhelmingly consistent with this message. And that is, there's a connection and unity of everyone and everything. And I will tell you, it took me a long time seeing this so many near-death experiences, because that was so different from what I believed growing up, to really get that there's obviously, without a doubt, a core message that we need to learn from near-death experiences, that connection of unity and with everyone and everything. And that connection extends to God. Over and over and over in near-death experiences, we talk how the near-death experiencers tell me that connection includes that we're all, each and every one of you here in this room, every person on the face of this earth, have a real connection with God. And that is, to me, a revelation. I was amazed. So we're now, once again, having not a little evidence, not a few anecdotes, but hundreds of near-death experiences all giving us that message. For lack of a better term, there is a God, a force, a universal, overwhelming love and intelligence that is real. Oh yeah, there's an afterlife. You've heard the evidence, and the evidence just keeps getting higher. There is certainly some strong evidence in near-death experiences for reincarnation. What I'm seeing with overwhelming consistency in near-death experiences is that, in reality, every one of you, is an eternal being currently in an earthly life for a reason. and for profound purpose. Certainly, what our experiences are and what we are learning here is profoundly important, more than I could have possibly imagined. For example, lessons of love, lessons of knowledge, lessons that involve relationships, incredibly important, straight from near-death experience evidence. But it's beyond near-death experience. You see, we have NDERF, which has over 2,500 near-death experiences posted on it, but there's two other websites that Jody and I run. We have one called adcrf.org, devoted to after-death communication. And in that website, we've now had 2,000 people share remarkable communications from the ones that have gone on from their departed. And it is incredible, the evidence and information we're getting from that. The other website we have is oberf.org, stands for Out of Body Experience Research Foundation.org. That website includes deathbed visions. It includes out of spontaneous, out of body experiences. It includes spiritually transformative events and all other spiritual experiences that don't fit in the other websites. We have way over 2,000 experiences shared on that website only. And I will tell you, in the next book, we're going to find that there is a spectrum of spiritual experiences that near-death experience is a subset of. And all of these experiences profoundly and with great consistency pointing to that key message, that consistent message, that there is life after death, and that we are far, far more than our physical bodies. In fact, as one of the near-death experiencers put it so succinctly, as you study this material, as you grow in understanding the way things really are, you're remembering your magnificence, each and every one of you. This is the most patient audience in the world. I've been talking for a long time, and I am astounded at how attentive people have been, and I appreciate that. We are close to getting into questions and answers, and oh, is that going to be interesting. But the final conclusion that we have here is that my preliminary research points to radical findings. Some of the strongest evidence that's ever been presented that absolutely there is an afterlife. Can you imagine a world where there's no fear of death? How different would that be? Can you imagine a world where throughout the globe people understood the reality of God, really understood God, that overwhelming, loving, compassionate being that I think we all sense and all know? Imagine harmony among religions throughout this earth. Radical change. And oh my gosh, if we got evidence times hundreds for how critically, vitally important, how radically important and meaningful and purposeful our lives are. Whatever your background, whatever your lot in your earthly life, you are incredibly important, valuable, overwhelmingly beloved beings whose lives here are incredibly important and meaningful and significant. What if we could bring that forward to the world and have the world really, really get at the deepest level that we all have that understanding? If people could live their life really knowing that they are valuable beings, meaningful and purposeful lives, in spite of the life's difficult, and how beloved we all are. Can you imagine? It's who we really are, and all my evidence is pointing overwhelmingly to this. We are all magnificent beings. Near-death experience is in a world real. Imagine the world listening to that incredible information that all of us know how much we could share with the world. What it would do. Profound implications for science, for religion, for all of us. This is absolutely the evidence which is already changing the world in a very significant way, with my first book, and it was literally a warm-up for the next book. I'm hoping that this will have a huge impact and literally change the world. So thank you all. Really appreciate your attention here today. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thanks. Thank you. Wow. Good gosh, I've never had a round of applause. Thank you so much. I am incredibly honored and humbled by that incredibly enthusiastic response to my talk, especially given how long it was. That's incredible. I hope it was worth your while. I had a lot to share, and really appreciate your all listening. Now, I think we're going to enter into what, to me, and I hope for you too, is going to be a fantastically significant and exciting part of this program, where if you have questions, ask any question you want, anything and everything. I would be delighted to take all questions now. I've got all the time in the afternoon. You've probably noticed I like talking about this. And I'm thrilled that everybody here is so interested in listening. So I think we're going to have a very, very special part of this program where we have some more questions, and I'll do my best to respond, and if I don't know, I'll tell you that. If I'm speculating, I'll speculate. But I am absolutely, coming here as a student, fascinating in hearing comments and questions that you all have here. And oh, I know you've got them. With a group like this, it's obviously got this fund of knowledge and this fund of interest and all of your life experiences and all of your awareness. I am sure that there's going to be some fascinating things that we need to share. So